Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a special episode where I'll be discussing a topic that has been very popular on my channel. In fact, it's probably the topic that has gained my channel the most recognition, as small as that recognition might be, and that is the Galactic Empire's Stormtroopers and the UNSC's Marines. Which of these two soldiers is the superior? Who would win if they were in a fight? A year ago I made a machinima of these two factions fighting. I never intended for that video to prove who was actually better. It was simply a cinematic project that I wanted to mess around with. My channel was receiving little to no attention prior to that video, and because of this I took little to no thought when making this video, besides attempting to learn how to make an actual machinima. Very little fact was used in the video. It was not an accurate portrayal of either of these military powers. Today, however, more than a year after the release of that original video, I've decided to make a video to really compare these two factions. With that being said, you should know that I do not claim to have a definitive answer. In the end, these are two fictional factions with no real way of knowing who was better or who would win in a fight. I will be giving you my opinions based off of the research that I have done into these two factions and telling you what has led me to this conclusion. Now, before I do start, I just want to clarify this video is looking at the Stormtrooper versus the Marine. We are not looking at anything else at this time. Not the size of the military, vehicles, or any special forces either faction could bring to bear in an all-out war. I want this video to be very concise and very focused. The less fluff, the less muddled the answer really becomes. So, to reiterate, we are looking at the average soldier, a Marine versus a Stormtrooper. That's all. To do this, I have decided on 3 points to look into that will help us better understand these two factions and their combat effectiveness. The first is their training. Now keep in mind that even with all the information in the world, everything that I could gather, this is the least reliable of the points I'm going to make. Training is situational and can vary from soldier to soldier in how well they retain said training. It's honestly as useless as comparing. So many people have compared like Russian Spetsnaz and US Army Rangers and looked at their training and said this or this. Well, honestly, the training isn't always the biggest part. I mean, they both receive great training, but it does play a part in this video. But moving on to the second part, we will be looking at the armor of these two factions. This will include the actual protection the armor would provide, as well as the functionality of the armor. And lastly, we'll be looking at the primary weapon used by the two factions, but only the main weapon. Throwing in more weapons is just more fluff, as I said earlier, and we want to keep the resolution very clear. We don't want to muddle it with too many situational things, such as sniper rifles, missile launchers, machine guns. This will be the two main weapons. I don't want to add too many what-ifs in an already very what-if themed video. The Stormtrooper is inherently different than their predecessor, the Clone Trooper. Unlike the Clone Trooper, the Stormtroopers were mostly non-clone recruits. Their entire life wasn't about becoming a Stormtrooper. They were effectively more similar to modern militaries than Clone Troopers were. Their recruitment age, I do believe, was 18 years old, although they could become cadets at an earlier age, I do believe, although I've found kind of varying sources on that. Their training was brutal. I've been able to find that. They used they used moving obstacles that could be changed to help them out. And one of the biggest things they were trained on was really to become loyal to the Emperor and to become brutal. And to quote the reference book Ultimate Star Wars, which is simply just a reference book, Stormtroopers were trained to disregard fallen comrades in battle and to press on no matter the cost, even when the odds were stacked against them. This mentality is very visible, I think, in the Star Wars movies, as well as in several of the books that I've read. Stormtroopers were taught really to press forward over the bodies of their own, working to kind of swamp the enemy under numbers and blaster fire, overtake and pressure their enemies into breaking was kind of their style of combat and their tactic. Now, unfortunately, I haven't found very much about the training of the Marines in the Halo universe. It is just one showcase, really, of how little and unreliable the information is for this video. But for the sake of having something to look at, we could look at the modern American Marine training as a close example of the root of the UNSC's training. Halo universe, unlike the Star Wars one, happens in our own future and not in a galaxy far, far away, so it is reasonable to assume their training would have been similar if flavored differently to fit equipment and technology differences that they would have had. However, we do get one good look into Marine training in the web series Forward Unto Dawn. The biggest thing that I would like to point out for that is the use of real squad-based movements and tactics. It is shown that UNSC Marines were as well versed in squad-based tactics as their modern predecessors. Now, to kind of sum up all that, and this, as I said, was the most unreliable bit of this video, just because the information was varying or very, very sparse. But the biggest differences between the training of these two factions really would be that Stormtroopers fought in larger groups intent on overwhelming the enemy through firepower and intimidation. A straightforward but effective method considering their role in the Star Wars warfare. It was much more conventional in method than the UNSC Marines would have been. They were trained to fight in smaller fire teams and squads, taught to outmaneuver the opponent to gain the advantage rather than simply overtake them. In doctrine alone, I tend to favor the Marines, simply because in smaller scale firefights, these methods that they used would have given them an upper hand against an opponent like the Stormtrooper using a more straightforward tactic. In physical training, however, it's a lot harder to say. I didn't find anything really on the Marines training, although, as I said, we can look at modern Marines as kind of a rough example of what that would have been like. And the Stormtroopers had very good physical, very brutal physical training from what I've seen. And they especially used these really cool obstacle courses that could kind of be generated to do different things. But I honestly would have to say that both groups would probably have been in similar physical conditioning, just from the level of effectiveness I've seen from them. It is really hard to say, though, and as I said several times, this the training segment of this part is sparse in information and is already very unreliable, but I would probably give the edge to the UNSC Marine. Stormtrooper armor was a sort of evolution from the Clone Trooper Phase 2 armor. It was specifically designed to be intimidating. The armor was made up of 18 overlapping plates of plastoid. Now, the most important thing to find out with this information really is the effectiveness of the material plastoid as an armor. However, I was unable to find any reliable sources for just how effective the base material plastoid is. I do know that Stormtrooper armor was designed to facilitate use in really any environment the trooper would find themselves in. When it comes to combat effectiveness, sources vary considerably, but the consensus seems to be that direct blaster bolts could kill the trooper. The armor would protect against shrapnel and work to disperse the energy of blaster bolts to attempt to save the trooper's life, even if it put him out of the fight. Unfortunately, despite these great features, the armor was known to tire the trooper and prohibit movement. In particular, it is said that the helmet drastically reduced effective accuracy even with the better trained troopers. The UNSC Marine Corps' battle dress uniform was very different. The battle dress uniform provided traditional advantages of passive camouflage. This was covered by metal plates that covered the torso, shoulders, and lower legs. Some versions included arm and thigh pieces. Even the armor itself is made up of several layers to help absorb kinetic energy from the impact of bullets, and even had a layer to help prevent plasma penetration and burning. Now, comparing these two sets of armor is hard to do without knowing more about the weapons that they needed to be able to penetrate these armors, but disregarding that for a short time, it's easy to make a couple of observations. Stormtrooper armor was definitely more effective at protecting the wearer from both enemy and the environment, while the UNSC armor was lighter and less cumbersome. Their armors directly reflected their fighting style as stated before. The Stormtroopers had armor that provided their entire body with protection while they stormed an enemy stronghold, while the Marines used a lighter, less protective armor that helped facilitate their quick fireteam maneuvers. I also think it's reasonable to say that plastoid is probably more effective than steel alloys used in the Marines' armor. The Stormtroopers' main weapon was the E-11 blaster rifle, a lightweight but powerful rifle. The E-11 featured 3 power settings: lethal, stun, and sting. The blaster included a telescopic sight and a 3-point folding stock, which is never really seen used in the films, but could be used to convert the blaster into a full-sized rifle. Its standard power cells carried 100 shots each, however the rifle could also be loaded with plasma cartridges that could last for more than 500 shots. This meant the Stormtrooper could carry less cartridges, leading to less weight. The MA-5D assault rifle and its predecessors used the 7.62 by 51mm armor-piercing full metal jacket rounds. The actual muzzle velocity from this round is more than 2,600 feet per second, or 792 meters per second. These rounds were designed to pierce body armor, so the rounds were reasonably large and are surrounded by a molded jacket of either steel or titanium, which enhances its armor-piercing capabilities. The round also might have been tipped with carbide or a similar hardened material. This again shows just how different these two factions really are, despite both being set in a science fiction universe. The 11 blaster is undeniably the more powerful and even lightweight of the two, however it does have its disadvantages. The 11 bolts would be easily visible, also traveled much slower than modern bullets do, giving away the Stormtrooper's position and even what his target would have been. While the assault rifle was much heavier and probably didn't pack quite as much punch, it certainly makes a lot less noise, and the shots wouldn't have been visible. It did, however, have muzzle flashes that would have revealed where they were, but it still would have been harder to pinpoint an exact target in the middle of a firefight. Again, showing the individual fighting styles of each faction. The Stormtroopers wouldn't have been as concerned about revealing their position, when their position generally was, in fact, charging straight into your face. The assault rifle of the Marines would also require them to carry more clips of ammunition, bogging them down with extra weight. I think each clip of ammunition for the assault rifle had like 32. It changes per game and per book, but I think you could reasonably say somewhere between 30 and 40 rounds is how many bullets each clip had in it. Overall, I think the raw power of the E-11, along with its smaller, more compact size, make it a more useful weapon. Now, what can we conclude from all this? Well, like I have overstated and stated again, these two groups had very different styles of fighting. Their equipment and training all point to this, from the Stormtroopers' in-your-face, aggressive horde mentality to the Marines' more tactical squad-based maneuvering. Also, we should consider a few very important points, namely how effective their respective armors would be against the weapons of the other faction. It's a safe bet that the E-11 blaster could do some pretty major damage to the Marine, even with that layer in their armor that provides some plasma and energy protection. The real question here, however, is how much damage could the Marines' assault rifle actually do against the Stormtroopers' plastoid, nearly full body armor? It's hard to tell. Most combat of the Stormtroopers was against blasters, but the closest example of a projectile similar to that of the assault rifle would have to be the slug throwers. It is stated again and again that the Stormtroopers' armor was near impervious to slug thrower ballistic-based weapons, with an exception. Specialized armor-piercing ballistic rounds were known to be able to penetrate Stormtrooper armor. As stated before, the Marines used this style of ammunition for their assault rifles. Still, the comparison is weak, and I'm left scratching my head without a real definitive answer. Let's, however, assume that the armor-piercing rounds of the Marines are enough to occasionally penetrate the Stormtrooper's armor, even really if it's only occasionally. Another aspect we have to look at that you might not have expected me to talk about is the major opponents these two groups actually face in their respective military histories. Now, this topic might be better suited for when I want to do a full discussion about Galactic Empire versus UNSC rather than Stormtroopers versus Marines, but I think it still holds true. I think it's still an important topic to discuss, even just quickly. For the Stormtroopers, their main war was with the Rebels, a conventional force. The Stormtroopers found themselves facing a very unconventional styled warfare, something that their common rank Stormtrooper soldiers were unfamiliar with, really. It was seen time and time again that the Stormtroopers were able to fight a conventional battle, like the Battle of Hoth. They were able to overwhelm and destroy their enemies in these situations very easily, in fact. However, when faced with less conventional tactics, like they saw at the Battle of Endor, the Stormtroopers suddenly lost their traction and the battle was turned against them. Compare this to the Human Covenant War. The UNSC were constantly losing against the more numerous and powerful forces of the Covenant. However, despite this, they began to learn how to fight back against this more conventional army. While it is true that if it weren't for the Spartans, they probably, well, most likely would have lost the war entirely, it's also true that the Marines in particular began to learn from their mistakes, learn from their training, and even their history with fighting the insurrection wars. They began to fight unconventionally, to use these things to their advantage. Much like the Rebels in the Star Wars universe, they rarely won straightforward battles, but they managed to hold their own in individual strategic firefights and did eventually win the war because of this. So what can we conclude from all this entire rant of mine? Well, first of all, that I don't have nearly enough time to cover the entirety of this subject. And second of all, honestly, this subject is science fiction. It's a fictional topic. These are two fictional groups. And third, what we've learned is inconclusive. Yep. You just watched this entire video to hear me say that I don't have a fucking clue who would win. The Stormtroopers were undeniably the more powerful group, but I hold firmly to the belief that the Marines fought more tactically. If I was pressured into giving one group a slight edge over the other, I think I would have to side with the Marines. And I went back and forth on this decision 100 times making this video. And it's a very, very hard thing to say. And and I know tons and tons of you are going to disagree with me, and all of your arguments that you use against me are valid, and I agree with you. But in my personal opinion, after reading all this, after doing the research, I think that if there was 10 Marines fighting 10 Stormtroopers, 6 times out of 10, they would win that fight. But then 4 times out of that 10, the Stormtroopers would win that fight. So that's pretty damn close. So I don't know. That's my opinion. That's what I think. However, I will say this. Even though I do believe that, I also believe that in an extended war, like a real war, like the full Galactic Empire versus the UNSC, that might not hold true. I think that the Galactic Empire has way more firepower, way more power and ability to fight a war in and of itself. A battle, I sort of kind of want to lean toward UNSC, but the war, I lean towards Galactic Empire heavily. But we're going to be discussing more of that and doing more research later. I'm going to be comparing perhaps, what I want to do is compare some vehicles with each other. Some UNSC versus Galactic Empire vehicles, starships, fighters, special forces like ODSTs, and the special forces, the commandos of the Stormtroopers. And then I'd also like to compare Spartans versus, what are they called? Black Stormtroopers or Death Troopers? I think they might be called Death Troopers. But that is a video for another day. So I thank you guys for watching this. I hope that you don't think that I'm being overly biased. I mean, obviously a little bit of bias does creep into this type of video. And for me personally, I will admit that one extra win that the Marines would get is probably due strictly to my bias. Otherwise, it probably would be a 5-5, completely evenly matched with how many times they would win. But I do generally favor when a smaller group fights a bigger group when they use unconventional tactics, or when they use more tactical tactics, sort of say, instead of more conventional, straightforward tactics. Anyways, this has been a long rant, and I don't know if it's made any sense or if any of you guys are even going to enjoy this, but I hope you did enjoy it. Oh, sorry, my microphone just almost fell over. But if you did enjoy it, leave a like and a comment. That way I know that you guys want to see more of these videos, because if you don't want to see any more videos like this one, then I'm just not going to do any more of this and just leave it at this video. But Gmod NPC Wars will be coming out soon, and we will see a return of the UNSC versus Galactic Empire NPC Wars. So I'll see you then, my pleasant little friends. Yes. Try and keep the hate comments to a slight minimum in this video, please. I love you all.